I'm Daniel Minty, a cognitive behavioral therapist, teacher, and writer. When I was a boy, I heard the story of the Garden of Eden. Eden derives from a Sumerian word meaning uncultivated or natural. Living in Eden, we live in our natural condition. We eat when we're hungry. We sleep when we're tired. The King James Bible states Adam and Eve were both naked and were not ashamed. That is, they were nakedly and unashamedly themselves. They had nothing to cover over or cover up. This story seems to state a deep truth, not about first ancestors, but about ourselves. You and I are Adam and Eve. We are always already living in and as this natural condition. The Genesis story continues. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat. For on the day thou eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. God was right, of course. Labeling ourselves good or evil separates us from our natural lives. We won't find such labels in nature, in the garden. Making and buying into these judgments removes us from our naturalness, evicts us from Eden. Speaking of gardens, I belong to a garden cult, the New Mexico Native Plant Society. We plant and protect native plants that have names like Apache plume, bear grass, Indian blanket flower. We make war on what we call invasive species, African rue, Russian knapweed, even Canadian thistle. The Soil and Water Conservation District is an ally in this war. It calls our enemies noxious weeds and maintains a list called the Dirty Dozen, a horticulturist's version of the FBI's 10 Most Wanted. Some trees have actually been declared illegal. I'm harboring 2 illegals in my front yard right now. They're members of the family Athanaceae. Their common name is Mexican mulberry. We eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as regards animals as well. Rats, we know, are evil. Muskrats are good. These judgments are always contextual. In a First Nation Genesis story, after all the other animals fail at the task, muskrat dives to the bottom of the sea and returns with mud from which the earth is created. In the Netherlands, on the other hand, muskrats are invasive pests whose burrowing threatens the dikes and levees that make life possible in this low-lying place. In the Netherlands, these invaders are hunted down by posses, trapped and poisoned. Notice how these judgments slip into our speech. My First Nation friends are native. I and my Latinx friends are invaders, in my case, from the British Isles. My invasive race's conduct in these Rocky Mountains over the last 200 years would certainly justify it showing up on any Dirty Dozen list. We regularly label each other in many ways. And while you won't find any good or bad guys in the Garden of Eden, in the real world, such judgments become self-fulfilling prophecies. Labeling someone an enemy dramatically raises the probability that they will, in fact, start acting like one. We also label aspects of ourselves and each other as good and evil. Our age, our intelligence, our political convictions. Let's look at one such aspect, our body mass index. Everyone knows, that is, labels, what's called normal or healthy weight is good, and what's called unhealthy or overweight is bad. In 1998, the US National Institutes of Health lowered the cutoff between these designations from 28 to 25. Overnight, 29 million previously normal, healthy Americans became overweight, unhealthy Americans. What has changed in the real world since this single label was changed? A couple of things. One, we've discovered that being what is now called overweight is protective against a number of health risks. Heart surgery patients with higher BMIs have better survival rates than do their skinnier counterparts. Dubbed the obesity paradox, this benefit has been found to extend to patients with osteoporosis, traumatic injury, and certain cancers. Data also shows that people labeled overweight and low obese have a lower overall mortality risk than people in other categories. Despite this data, the judgment big is bad remains a pervasive construct in primary care medicine and in the culture at large, if you'll pardon the double entendre. The real source of health threats, completely unrelated to size, are sometimes ignored, and larger patients are dismissed with the simple instruction to lose weight. Big is indeed bad when we're denied the attention and care that smaller patients routinely receive. This construct has other deadly consequences. UCLA researchers told unwitting study volunteers they couldn't join an exclusive shopping experience because they were too big and might stretch out the clothing. Volunteers exposed to these weight stigma stimuli showed elevated stress biomarkers, including cortisol levels, blood pressure, and pro-inflammatory cytokines. These biomarkers increase risk for exactly the disease processes, such as cardiovascular illness, that are oftentimes still entirely blamed on size. Thus, weight stigma, negative judgments about one's size, is coming to be recognized as a mechanism that itself drives disease. Again, our negative judgments about ourselves can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Thinking our size is bad for us can make it so. Another aspect of ourselves we oftentimes label mercilessly is our emotions. Instead of nakedly and unashamedly experiencing and expressing our feelings, we separate them into categories of good and evil, passing judgment on our emotional selves and shamefully covering over many feelings. I shouldn't feel angry at my husband, we say. I shouldn't feel hurt. I shouldn't be disappointed on my honeymoon. I shouldn't hate my body. We give others these same injunctions, inviting them to deny and hide feelings that threaten our sense of propriety. Each time we eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we do indeed die a bit. Our vital signs, indicators of our physical, emotional, and relational power, weaken. We trade in our pink of health for a deathly pallor. Here's where CBT can step in. It offers many life-giving tools with which to relinquish commitments to unnatural judgments. For starters, we can do a cost-benefit analysis of a judgment. When I do a CBA on my participation in my garden cult, I come resoundingly down on the side of continued harsh, lethal judgment of certain plants as opposed to others. It's a ridiculous position, of course, and I'm sticking to it. There are other judgments I may be quite interested in relinquishing, if and when I perceive their price being higher than the benefits they confer. Happily, CBT provides us many other tools with which to do such work, with which to return to our natural condition, to Eden, which in fact is where we've all been all along. Thank you for watching this video. If you like what you've seen, subscribe to my channel. I'll look forward to reconnecting with you again soon.